If you know your East European history, then you may remember that during the late Soviet Union, there was Brezhnev. Then there was Gorbachev. Then in Russia, there was Yeltsin. And after that, there was Putin, Medvedev, Putin. However, none of those leaders did well. Brezhnev failed to sustain economic growth. During his rule, the Soviet Union entered the area of stagnation. Gorbachev failed in his Perstroika reforms. Yeltsin mismanaged the transition to capitalism, which resulted in widespread poverty, and Putin failed in invading Ukraine. So why were the late Soviet and Russian leaders so bad? Let's find out. First, we will have to go to 1960s, when Leonid Brezhnev came to power. He was in power for 18 years. During his time, the economic growth of the Soviet Union slowed down and it entered into stagnation. In the beginning of Brezhnev's time, the economy was growing fast. Then it gradually slowed down, and by the end of Brezhnev's time, it was growing much slower. The Soviet Union began falling behind other countries. Actually, the government attempted to achieve good growth. It pursued more than 7% yearly growth in the 1960s, 5% in the 1970s, and 4% in the 1980s. Quite strong growth numbers, but they were not realized. The reason why these growth numbers were not achieved was because the organization of the economy was not kept up with time. And this had to do a lot with the people who had to carry out these tasks, the bureaucrats. In the beginning of his time in power, Brezhnev said to his officials, "If you support me, then you can chill." They couldn't be fired, so they chilled. They also could not be promoted, because they could not be fired. So they stayed in their places for a long time. In order to chill harder, they put their friends into high positions and became entrenched. They began doing what they wanted. The government lost full control over the bureaucrats. This was very bad. When the government ordered the organization of the economy to be reformed, then the officials did do that only superficially, because it was against their interests. The government ordered the reforms, but the officials did not carry them out, which led to the growth targets not being met, which led to the Soviet economy entering into stagnation. So Brezhnev's main mistake was letting his control over the bureaucracy slip, which caused the Soviet economy to slow down. The next two Soviet leaders were in charge briefly, but then Mikhail Gorbachev came to power. Gorbachev was in power for 6 years. During this time, the Soviet Union entered into full decline and was dissolved. Gorbachev's goal was to reform the stagnating economy. The problem was that the officials did not carry out the government's will. In order to succeed, he needed to force the officials to do that. So he made a plan. In the Soviet Union, there was a group who could help him: the people. Gorbachev thought that the people were tired of stagnation. He wanted to end the stagnation and carry out economic reform. So Gorbachev thought that if the people and he made an alliance, then they would be unstoppable. So he allowed the people to speak freely and granted them other freedoms. The Soviet Union stopped being a dictatorship. Gorbachev's plan succeeded. Together with the people, they forced the officials to carry out the economic reforms in order to restart the economic growth. But despite his efforts, the officials proceeded to undermine the reforms. Sometimes they filed false reports, other times they overtly sabotaged him, just like during Brezhnev's time. The reforms ended up mismanaged. The old economy was broken, but the new one had not been generated. The people's lives were disrupted, and they became angry. So the people told themselves, Gorbachev is incompetent, let's find some new leaders. They transferred their allegiance to the leaders of the Soviet republics. This was the end of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev was unable to make the officials fully obey him, and this led to the failure of his policies and the end of the Soviet Union. One of the countries that emerged from the Soviet Union was the Russian Federation. The country was new, but it had inherited its officials from the Soviet Union. The first leader of Russia was President Boris Yeltsin. He was in power for 8 years. At that time, many post-communist countries transitioned to capitalism, but Russia suffered especially during the transition. The reason for this was that the officials did not fully obey Yeltsin. He wanted to break their power by introducing capitalism as fast as possible. This led to capitalism being introduced, but the institutions and laws to make capitalism work initially being absent. The economy suffered greatly during Yeltsin's time in power. Meanwhile, the old officials continued to undermine the reforms. The government gave state enterprises to private hands, and many officials took them over. Some of them led the enterprises into bankruptcy for personal gain. Others demanded large state subsidies. The state ran out of money, and during Yeltsin's time in power, the economic situation was difficult. But the reforms broke the power of the officials, and the Russian government was able to regain full control over them. Just kidding, they weren't. This leads us to the next leader. In 1999, a new leader came to power, President Vladimir Putin. After more than 20 years in power, he set out to fulfill his dream of taking over Ukraine. He launched a full-scale invasion of the country, and, wait for it, he did not succeed. The fighting has lasted for over 4 years, and during that time, Russia has captured only part of Ukraine. Putin's plan failed because of the officials that were in charge in Russia. Before President Putin launched the invasion, he made large preparations to make his forces strong. He ordered new missiles, new tanks, new equipment. He had the army conduct large exercises to become proficient in combat operations. The army had to be powerful enough to quickly overcome Ukraine's resistance. He also worked to undermine Ukraine. He sent his spies into the country so that they would recruit agents and build a network of collaborators. They had to weaken the country from the inside. But the problem was that the officials, the ones that had to carry all this out, were still not fully under the government's control. They still needed money to chill. Under different schemes, the money they had to spend on their tasks went on other things. Plans that the Russian government had set in building up its military and undermining Ukraine were not carried out to full extent. But the government was not in control over its officials to such an extent that President Putin didn't know that. He thought that Russia had enough force to subjugate Ukraine. So he did launch the invasion. The Russian forces did not have the strength to overcome the resistance, and the fighting dragged on for more than 4 years. So Putin's plan did not succeed, because he did not have enough control over his officials to implement it as intended. More than 50 years ago, the Soviet government lost control over its officials. Since then, they had several leaders: Brezhnev, Gorbachev, Yeltsin, and Putin. The lack of control over the officials led to the leaders to fail their objectives. So both the Soviet Union and Russia have been in decline. But remember, this is all a theory. A political theory, I guess. Do you have a better explanation? Let me know in the comments. In the next video, we will be back to our mapping style to see how a country near the Mediterranean goes to war. See you then.